How can parents help their children to have a healthy relationship with food? What is division of responsibility? Those are the questions that we're going to be answering in today's episode with Gila Glassberg, who is a registered nutritionist dietitian and so much more, has her own podcast on a ton of topics, and you should check out her show. It's an incredible show. And without further ado, enjoy the episode. Raising children in general is not easy. Throw in the desire to have passionate and committed Jews. Now that's next level hard. With weekly episodes on our parenting hierarchy, you will find the answers to your biggest parenting questions and gain the best practices you need to raise the children the way you want, to raise the Jews next door. So thank you so much, Gila, for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to talk about all these good stuff because I love to help parents have build a healthy home, including having a healthy relationship with food. So that's really important to me. So thank you for helping me spread the message.
Amazing. How did you get into, I know it's intuitive eating for adults, and how'd you get into division of responsibility? How'd you get into all this in the first place?
It's a great question. I feel like nobody ever asked me that about with kids. I always answer the question about intuitive eating, but not so much with kids. So I guess I'll tell you an abridged version of how I became an intuitive eating counselor or dietitian, and then I'll tell you more about how I work with parents and their children. So I struggled with my own disordered eating as a teen. That's a whole story in and of itself, but the short version is that I'm the fourth of 9. I grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, a very small community, and my mother, I always say she didn't make sure that we ate quote unquote healthy food. She just made sure that we ate. So we didn't have takeout or anything like that, but we ate tater tots and chicken nuggets, and I never really thought twice about it. And when I was in 9th grade, I moved to Teaneck for high school, and then I was allowed to eat pizza every single day, So I didn't think much of that either in 9th grade until I started thinking about it all the time because I was surrounded by what we call diet culture and everybody talking about losing weight and, how horrible fat is. And I just totally jumped on that dieting bandwagon and didn't think twice about it. Of course I don't want to be fat. Of course I shouldn't eat pizza just because everybody around me is talking about it. Which just speaks a lot about eating disorders, how they develop in teenagers, because if you have a low self-esteem and you're just so easy to be convinced about something, that totally contributes to eating disorders. So I'm just that's just an aside. But I didn't develop an eating disorder. I guess I'm lucky. And I went on a trip with my friends in 11th grade, and they saw the way that I was eating or not eating. And they kind of confronted me. And to me, I sort of had that aha moment, wow, even though I think I'm being so healthy because I'm eating so little and I'm losing weight, I'm clearly not healthy because I can't focus. I'm always talking about food. And my life revolves around being skinny. It was kind of just hit me as an 11th grader. And
you're saying that was because you were surrounded by diet culture.
Yeah. All my, I had a friend that was hospitalized for anorexia. All my friends were on diets, but not just, I'm sure, wow. I mean, all teenagers go on diets, unfortunately, especially girls, but it was very intense. I also didn't live at home. I didn't live with my parents. So maybe that was why it became so important to me. I also wasn't good at school. So it was a very big identity piece for me. I was good at losing weight, and that's a very big part of eating disorders. So yeah, I guess it's really a perfect storm how somebody would develop an eating disorder. And at the same time, I'm lucky that I didn't develop, because I do have I do fit that profile, very obsessive.
What's
about
the difference between what you were going through and what would be considered an eating disorder?
So eating disorders exist on a spectrum. So between eating disorder to disordered eating to, let's say, normal eating. And with eating disorders, it's just more extreme, more frequency of behaviors, more intense behaviors, not able to stop those behaviors, versus disordered eating is you're, let's say, more like a chronic diet or always thinking about food, but you could still function properly. You're not in a quote unquote unhealthy weight range. And let's say I didn't need intense treatment. So I was able to function and didn't lose a significant amount of weight. And I wasn't fainting at school or anything like that. And also the way that my supervisor explains it is basically by how much headspace food and and body image takes up in your brain. So like somebody who has anorexia is thinking about food 110% of their day. And how could it be 110% of their day? Because they're even dreaming about food. Because when you're so calorically deprived, your brain will think about food all day. Somebody who has, let's say, more like bulimia or even binge eating disorder, maybe that's more like 80 to 90% of your headspace. And someone in the disordered eating range is like 40 to 70%, something like that. Everyone, like is different, but like it means that your headspace is taken over by food and body image way more than you wanted to, that it would create a very poor quality of life. And that's how I explain it to people. Like, yeah, you could go on diets and you could lose weight, but it will take up so much of your headspace because your brain is so wired for survival, so that whenever we're in any sort of calorie deficit, that's why we always think about food when we're dieting. And those dieting friends who are always like, how many calories are in that? And which restaurant are we going to? It's so fattening. It's like, I know you're dieting. Like I could just tell,
Right. So you're saying you're saying your experience with that was what got you to be, you're saying you had this like aha moment when you were in 11th grade, and that was what got you out of it?
Well, that's what made me, that's what got me like out of, let's say, disordered eating / perhaps on the eating disorder spectrum a bit. But I decided in 11th grade that I wanted to become a quote unquote nutritionist. Really, the term is a dietitian. I didn't know that nutrition is a very, very science heavy field. I didn't know I would have to take anatomy and physiology. I didn't know any of that. And again, like I reflect on this a lot. Like I didn't live with my parents. I wasn't an academic. My parents didn't really care if I went to college or not. It wasn't like so much a part of like what I wasn't expecting to get my master's in nutrition, let's just say. But I had like this conviction, like this passion when I was in 11th grade, like I'm going to like teach the world about nutrition and quote unquote healthy food in a non-obsessive way because of what I went through. Like you could eat healthy food, you could switch from white flour to whole wheat and it could still taste just as good. Like I was very, very into that as like an 11th, 12th grader. And I knew I wanted to become a dietitian. I just didn't really know what it entailed. It was just like anyone who would ask me, I was like that. Again, that was a big part of my identity in seminary. I was always eating quote unquote healthy and I was the healthy girl and I would go running. And it was just, I was very passionate about it from that experience. And little did I know that about intuitive eating. I didn't know that there was a whole framework that sort of fit what I had went through. And I only learned about that later. So I would say that I still kind of was struggling with disordered eating. I just didn't think I was because everybody's always talking about dieting and weight loss, right? So even though it didn't interfere so much with my daily living, thank God, I still always was like counting calories in the back of my head and checking the nutrition facts and talking about it a lot and thinking, spending way too much time thinking, should I eat that or should I not eat that? But I was like, just like everybody else, basically, like I didn't have an eating disorder. I wasn't making myself sick. It wasn't taking up so much of my headspace, but definitely more than I wanted.
Conscientious eating. It just sounds like someone who's trying to be mindful of their eating. No, am I reading that wrong? Like it sounds like that to me.
Well, yeah, I guess that's how most people are now, but I know that that's not healthy because again, just through all my experience, my professional experience, my personal experience, it shouldn't take up so much of your time. You can make choices based on nutrition, but it shouldn't be the only reason why you make choices. Or you can make choices, but like you should think about what you eat, but you shouldn't think about it that much. It shouldn't take up so much of your headspace. And for me, especially because I was becoming a dietitian, I just thought that was normal. Like I still was thinking about food a lot and I still was, paying very, very close attention to my food. And I didn't like that because for example, what I would do a lot is I wouldn't eat, let's say, any candy or cake during the week. And then I would let myself have it on Shabbos. And I just found myself eating it and eating it and eating it. And I'm like, why am I eating this? I don't even want it. I know why I'm eating it because I'm not allowed to have it tomorrow. And it just felt very
wow,
uncomfortable to me. And I was like, okay, one day, I'm going to become a dietitian. I'm going to figure it out. And anyways, okay, fast forward, I did become a dietitian, even though it was extremely hard for me. I got married. I had my first kid while I was in school. And I was like, I just had so much it's a very hard field. It's a hard field to get into. You have to do an internship. You have to get into it. They try to get you, they scare you a little bit in school, only 50% of applicants get in. And I was very studious at that point. I was like, this is my life's mission, and I didn't really know any dietitians. And I just figured that when I was done, I would, help people with food. That's kind of what I thought. And when I graduated from school and I started working, my first job was in a nursing home, which I really did not like. And for many reasons. And one of them was that I kind of felt like I was the food police. So you would have like a resident who's been, who's diabetic, let's say, and they're in their 80s or their 90s, and they've been eating a certain way for X amount of years. And me, the dietitian who doesn't know this person, has never met them, walks into their room and they say, I see you have diabetes in your chart. You must be eating too much sugar. Try to cut back. It's such a horrible way to practice. I never met the person. I don't know the way that they're eating. Some people develop diabetes and it has nothing to do with the way that they're eating. It's very shaming and shameful, and not giving the resident or the client the autonomy that they deserve, or the space to explain themselves, or, explain why they're having such a hard time with sugar. Is it because they've been so restrictive? They're binging? Is it because they're bored? How can we help you in that area? So it was kind of like, to me, like, I really didn't like it. And I didn't see myself doing anything else, because I knew that dietitians in private practice were putting people on diets. And I did not want to do that. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I didn't want to do that. And I honestly felt really depressed. Like I went to a therapist to talk about it, or like, she's also like I don't know if she's really a therapist. She's more like a coach. And I was like, I just don't know what to do. Like I'm really passionate about nutrition and I love helping people with food. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to start my own business. I can't continue at the nursing home. Should I go back to school after all those years? I thought it was like, going to be like, I became a dietitian. My life is amazing. I can't believe I did this. I went through all this schooling, and it was not. So that's when she actually told me about intuitive eating. And I went online, I looked it up, and and she told me about Rena Reiser, who was like one of the first people to be doing this in the Frum world. I'm not sure if you know Rena.
For the name,
and she's
yeah.
So she's an intuitive eating counselor, and I really think she introduced intuitive eating to the Frum world. And I was still very like hesitant. I was like, this sounds really weird. And I spoke to Rena. We got in touch. She explained it to me. It still sounded weird. You should just eat chocolate all day. Is that what intuitive eating is? It helped me that two registered dietitians did write the book. So I was like more, open to it. I read the book, and to me, it felt like, oh, this is exactly what I went through in high school. When you go on a diet, you think about food all the time. When you restrict, you binge. Every time that happens, you feel terrible about yourself. You commit to never eating pizza again right? Like all those things was like, yes, 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 yes. And because I was like, I guess, desperately looking for something to help me personally and professionally, I took the training. I'm like, I'm taking this training, which like my husband was like, you're going to spend $1,000 on a training. You just finished all your years of schooling. I'm like, I know, but this is just,
Yeah.
So I took the training. I trained with Evelyn Tribole, one of the authors. I loved her. Everything just like sounded so like truthful to me. Like it just was like, yes, this is how you should help people. And it was so like wholesome, like get to know the person, understand why they're eating that way. How much are they using food to cope with their emotions? Do they lack other skills? Maybe they really don't know anything about nutrition, or maybe they know everything about nutrition and they just feel guilty every time they eat because some dietitian 10 years ago told them that white flour is going to kill them. Like I'm saying, I've heard it all. So that's when I just I got really immersed in the world of intuitive eating. Rena Reiser had started a chat from intuitive eating professionals. I was on that chat. I would ask a lot of questions. And to get to the point about with kids, somebody brought up something called the division of responsibility, which is a feeding model that we use in children. And I'll talk a little bit more about that.
Specifically part of intuitive eating, or no?
It's when you practice division of responsibility with your kids and you implement it, you raise intuitive eaters. So intuitive eating is more for the adult, and division of responsibility is for the child, because as an adult, you are fully in control of your eating. And as a child, you're not. Obviously, we don't, people think we're letting our kids eat candy and chocolate all day. It's not true. We as the parent have part of the responsibility, and the child does too. So, but I will just tell you something interesting, that when somebody brought it up in the chat, I had learned about that in school. It's in one of my nutrition and family classes. But this teacher was a little bit hippy dippy, and she was very into women's rights and letting your kids come with you to work. And I remember she brought her 10-year-old to class with her, because I guess that's how she felt, like your children could always be around you. And she let me bring my baby to class. I remember I brought my daughter to class sometimes. She was very into that, and she talked about the division of responsibility, and it made so much sense to me. But I only learned about it in that one class, and maybe it was, it was 4 months, and maybe 2 weeks was devoted to that. And I thought it was so cool. I just never learned about it again. So I sort of put it away in my head. And my daughter was maybe a year. And then when they brought it up in the chat, I was like, oh my God, the division of responsibility. I learned about that in school, and I thought it was so cool and truthful. And now my daughter's older and I'm having such a difficult time feeding her. She's not eating anything that I put on her plate. And I'm a dietitian and I know what's good for her. And why isn't she listening to me? And like, that's when, that's when like I was learning a lot about intuitive eating and I was starting my practice, but I was also really trying to learn about the division of responsibility, which I had learned about a little bit in school, and implementing it with my own children. And I saw amazing results that I just wanted to learn more. And I do primarily work with adults to teach them about intuitive eating. But obviously, some people come to me for their children, and it's like, okay, well, this is like I'm not going to work with your kids right now. I need to work with you and try to help you with the feeding dynamic in the home. And that's where I find it so empowering, because I feel like parents call me and they're like, can you work with my 8-year-old? Can you work with my 9-year-old? And I'm like, no, I need to work with you, and I could give you tips, and you could have a healthier relationship with food. And dinner time doesn't have to be that everyone's throwing their plates on the floor and everybody's screaming and you're crying because you cooked dinner for 5 hours and nobody wants to eat your food and you're guilting your kids. It's like, I mean, we all have been there. It's so chaotic,
Yeah,
and
of
it feels
course.
so.
That's very realistic and very practical like that. That's what almost every parent goes through on at least once a week, if not many more times a week.
Right, exactly. So, people
So
are
the
desperate.
model, so take us through the model a little bit of, I guess, so you're saying it's more the work of intuitive eating as opposed to division of responsibility, meaning it's more important for parents to take on becoming intuitive eaters. That way they can raise children who are intuitive eaters. And the way to do that is through division of responsibility.
That's an interesting way to put it. Like, I think that some parents aren't ready to practice intuitive eating themselves. If they are, it makes a huge difference on the kids for sure. But even if they aren't ready, they could still implement the division of responsibility. If that makes sense. The division of responsibility is this feeding model that Ellen Satter developed, and she is a social worker and a social worker and a dietitian. And like I said, I learned about this in school. So the division of responsibility is that the parent is decide of the what, where, and when of eating. So what they're eating, when they're eating, and where they're eating, and the child decides how much and if any. That's what the division of responsibility is. So let's just say, like, tonight for dinner, on Thursday night, we usually, let's say, have pizza, and I cut up some vegetables and I serve my kids dinner at, let's say, 5:00, right? So if they're like, no, but we want to have tater tots or chicken nuggets, I'm like, okay, but this is what's for dinner. And dinner time is, let's say, from 5 to 5:30. When you're done with your plate, dinner time is over. I'm just giving you an example because I'm not really done explaining it. Okay. That's like one part of the division of responsibility. The next part of the division of responsibility is that there always has to be a safe food served to the child, and a safe food is a food that your child does like. So let's say the example that I always give is, like, you want to serve salmon, broccoli, and sweet potatoes for dinner, and you know that this child does not like salmon. You must have a safe food on the table for them to choose. And maybe you want to make sure that it's a protein because they're not getting their protein from salmon. So you could offer them edamame, you could offer them cheese, you could offer them yogurt, you could offer them meat if you have it available, like leftovers from Shabbos. But the point is that you're not like we call like a short order cook. You're not like making a whole new dinner. Another part of the division of responsibility is that children can be exposed to a food 100 times before they try it and they like it. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, a big part of it is that we don't force them to eat it, but we expose them to the food. So what I always say, and to me, it makes like perfect sense, is that what happens a lot with like mom and child is that, the 1-year-old is an amazing eater, and they eat everything. They eat cholent, they eat salmon, they eat schnitzel, they eat chicken soup, right? They're amazing. Then, terrible twos happen, and they become very picky, and they throw everything off their plate. And the mom gets very frustrated, which is exactly what happened to me. Why isn't she eating it? It's so annoying. I cook this food, and I know she likes it. It's so good for her. Try to put it in the child's mouth. The child will not eat it. So what happens? The parent decides, I just need them to eat something. I'll make them chicken nuggets. The child just learned, if I fight enough, I will get chicken nuggets, right? And we all know those families that every night there's chicken nuggets or pizza bagels, which is fine. And that could work for somebody's family. I think that if you are working on a healthier feeding dynamic, you want to expose your kids to all different types of foods, whether it's pizza and pizza bagels or it's chicken and sweet potatoes and broccoli, right? So that's like the general gist of the division of responsibility. And now we actually call it, I sort of combine it with something called responsive feeding, which is where these are not hard and fast rules, and you have to, you really have to tailor it to every single family. And that's why when I work with moms or parents together, we call it like responsive feeding, because I give them some ideas and tips to try, and they see how it works in the family. And then they come back to me and I say, okay, this part worked, this part didn't. And we respond based on how it's working in the family. And I think that that's also like a really interesting level of the division of responsibility, because like it's every family is so different. So, and Ellen Satter wasn't Jewish and she didn't have 6 kids. And that also plays a huge role. And like, if you're letting your 10-year-old eat yogurt, but like your 2-year-old sees it, are they allowed to have it too? So it's one of those things where like, I'm giving you just general guidelines, but it's very different for every single family. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah. Totally. One thing one question I had is that you mentioned that having like a safe food, and you said on the table. Does it mean that it actually needs to be like on the table in order for it to be like visible for them, or it's just like it's something that they know is in the house, and if they want, they could ask for it? Or is it like it needs to be present for them to actually see it?
That's such a good question. So, we definitely recommend like family style eating. So like all the food's on the table and the child could take whatever they want, or if you're making them a plate, you'd ask them, do you want some of this? Do you want some of that? No, it doesn't have to actually be on the table, but there should be a list of safe foods in the house that your child you could easily give them, or they could even make themselves. And kids can make themselves food when they're like 5 years old. And that could be like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or go get a yogurt from the fridge, or take, an apple or a cucumber or whatever. But, it shouldn't be, it's not a good dynamic when the parent's always catering to the child either. So it's not just for the child to learn. It's also for the parent to function. So I have 4 children. If I know families that do this, and I'm not judging them. I totally understand the frustration, but I know families that everyone has a different dinner. I don't think that's such a good feeding dynamic. You want your kids to get used to dinner time is when we all sit together and we all share a meal. And even if it's not my favorite meal, I try it and I like it. And maybe I'll add some mustard to it, or I'll add some salt to it, and like I'll figure out how to like it. But to cater to them, they're never going to feel good about their eating, because they're always going to think, what's my other option? Or it even
doesn't the safe food like do that anyways? Meaning I'm not saying that I'm against the safe food. I'm wondering, I'm questioning if they have a safe food that they know that they can always go to. Let's say, for example, like that child likes that peanut butter sandwich and they don't want chicken right now. They don't want the salmon or whatever it is. So isn't it just they always have that easy out of that safe food, and therefore they don't have it, like, meaning how does that help them to learn what the, good food choice is?
Right. So that's such a good question also. So like the point is like exposure. The more exposure that they have, the more likely that they'll try it and even possibly like it. Right. So let's just say like the child always wants a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but their 4 siblings and their parents are eating, what do we have last night? Hamburgers and sauteed veggies within a pita. And I've seen this with my kids. Maybe the first, second, third time they're like, ugh, I hate that. But if you don't give them any pressure and you offer it to them, hey, can I make you a plate? You don't even have to eat it. Everything is a win. Everything that your child does in terms of accepting food is a win. So let's say they're like, you go put it on my plate, but I'm not going to eat it. And you're like, great, I'm going to put it on your plate, right? Let's say they touch it. Let's say they smell it. Let's say they lick it. Let's say they put it on their mouth. Anything is a win. And I like when parents.
You're saying you're not even trying to encourage them to do that. It's there. And if they want to interact with it, they interact with it. If they don't want to interact with it, they don't have to. They can end up choosing to not even touch it at all and just go to the safe food and Shalom Yisrael, we're good to go.
Well, you should definitely offer it. That's the point.
I'm saying you're offering to make a plate. You're putting it in front of them. And then within this model, don't push it more than that. No pressure.
It's not, I don't think there should be any pressure, but you could still encourage without pressure, if that makes sense. Because I know that with my own kids,
how would that?
I might say to them, like, are you sure you don't want to try a hamburger? It has a lot of protein in it, and protein's really, really good for your muscles. And they might say, yuck. And I'm like, okay, not tonight. But that doesn't mean they won't ever try it. Don't give up, because once you give up, they're never going to try it. Like, think of your child who was never, ever exposed to hamburgers, and they're, in seminary and they're 18 and now there's hamburgers. It's disgusting to them, especially a naturally more picky kid. And especially those kids where you're like, just try it. Just take one lick. They're for sure not going to try it, because think about it. Like, I always give the example, like herring. Like, I'm never going to try herring. I don't want to eat herring. If somebody would make me eat herring, I would dig my heels in. And I would also be like, I am for sure never eating herring. And that's I'm saying that's me as a 33-year-old. So you have to think about it from like a kid's perspective, that food really is scary to them. Like they've never seen a pepper. They've never seen yogurt, let's just say, whatever. They've never seen salmon. And now you're like, you have to try it. And it does smell a little fishy. And that's why kids naturally, kids are more inclined to sweet foods like whatever, candy, or they're more inclined to foods that like have a lot of like salty flavor, let's say like chicken nuggets or fish sticks. But in other countries where we don't have that convenience foods, kids eat whatever their parents are eating. They eat the spicy salmon, like Moroccan salmon. Like so many kids, I see them eating, like my kids love spicy food because I love spicy food and I cook with a lot of spice. And people say like, oh, I don't want to give my baby anything with a lot of pepper. Why? Give them the food with the pepper. They'll get used to it. They'll learn it. It's an acquired taste. Just like we know that like the first time that we tried like sushi, we might have been like, this is so weird. The texture is weird. The flavor's weird. But then we're like, hey, it tastes good. And if somebody was forcing us to try it, I'm assuming you wouldn't try it. But if you're like, oh, cool, my friend's eating it and she's telling me how good it is without forcing me, I'm much more inclined to try it.
Right. So, I mean, we'll come back to candy in a second because I'm curious where this plays with that. But so I want to make sure like I'm clear. The goal of division of responsibility is to, maybe I'll finish the sentence and you'll tell me if I'm correct. The goal of it is to give the children exposure to food. That way they develop healthy relationships with it and that they're okay with trying different foods. Is that the goal, or am I missing something?
That's definitely one of the goals. Number one, the first goal is that there's a happy, healthy home around mealtime. Okay. Because like I said before, how many parents complain that like there's such a power struggle around food, and the more they push, the less their kid eats, and they just end up making chicken nuggets anyways. Right. So we want, if a mother comes to a meal frustrated and angry, even if they do get their kid to eat the fresh chicken that they made, you're not really feeding your kid such healthy atmosphere, right? It's not just the food that you're feeding them, it's the healthy atmosphere, right? So first and foremost is that even if your kid does eat chicken nuggets every single night and you are okay and you're not like crying, that's to me is a win. So we have to have a healthy mom and healthy parents and healthy kids around food to have a healthy relationship with food. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that mom isn't constantly catering to all the different kids, because that's also not, to me, I don't think that's functional. And on a behavioral level, we shouldn't cater to our kids like that, right? Mealtime is mealtime, and bedtime is bedtime, and we do our best to accommodate, but you can't spend 2 hours feeding 4 kids. Even if you do have the time, I don't think that's a good message to give to your kids, that I'll bend over backwards just because that's not how life works,
Yeah.
And then also for kids to feel safe and exposed to foods in a safe environment, that they might even try it and they might even like it, and remembering that it can take many, many, many times until they will try it and they will like it. And I guess that is working on ourselves as parents, to have patience and to work on ourselves to be calm, and to, I just heard this chinuch share that like chinuch is into the future. Like I always tell parents, I want you to think about your 2-year-old as an 18-year-old at someone else's Shabbos meal. And if they never had to try, if they never had salmon offered to them, or they were forced to eat salmon, now they're an adult and they have full control over what they're eating and what they're buying and all those things. Like you still want them to make choices that like, I'll have some salmon, I'll also have some French fries, and then maybe I'll have some candy for dessert. And like, that to me is like so positive. And that's really how we raise intuitive eaters, that like when you're hungry, you eat, when you're full, you stop most of the time. You eat fruits and vegetables, and you eat candy, and you aren't binging or feeling out of control around food, right? That's what intuitive eating is. So in order to do that, we do have to separate the responsibility, because we are still somewhat in control of our kids eating. Like I said before, we're in charge of the what, where, and when. So, and then, then they're adults and they get to choose what, where, and when.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying by when a parent is choosing the what, where, and when, and giving the children in a way like the free rein to decide, okay, how much they're going to eat and what of it they're going to eat, then that's enabling them to then, like you're saying, in the future, make the choices of, okay, hopefully we're going to make healthy food choices down the line that, is not necessarily. What's interesting about this is, to go on a tangent for a second, is that we're not necessarily even talking about healthy food per se. I mean, I know that's right. Like, what right. defines healthy food, but it's about right. having a relationship with food where I can have all these different things, and that's okay. It's just about knowing, what's the right amount or when to eat it, and like that type of thing.
Right. So like most of us, we know that, like, let's say after Yantif, we want like a really big salad, right? I hear this from people all the time. Like, I'm so like heavy fooded out. I really want a big salad. So kids, like, that's why we have to decide the what. Like, I will coach parents on, I'll give parents a lot of nutrition education, like, let's say protein, carbs, fats, fruits, vegetables. If your kid doesn't eat fruits in school because it's maybe just serve, it's okay. Then they'll have 2 fruits when they come home, that's totally fine. So I still want parents to have some general nutrition information. Nutrition isn't that complicated. Like I said before, we want like adequacy of protein, carbs, fats, fruits and vegetables, whole grains, like, will provide more fiber than white grains. Let's just say, like, things like that. But if your kid hates whole wheat noodles, please don't make them whole wheat noodles. But maybe they tolerate brown rice. Okay, that's a good choice, But nothing should be like pressure, and nothing should make the parent feel guilty about what they're serving the kids. Sometimes they're working late and they're doctors and they're saving the world, and they're going to have fish sticks 2 nights a week, and that's okay. But the goal is that they are exposed to all different types of foods in a non-pressuring way, and that we do have some control, quote unquote, of what they're eating because we provide the what, but we are giving them a lot of choice and ability to choose. And therefore, hopefully, when they are in a place where we don't have a say over their eating, they will make choices that incorporate all different types of food.
So I guess that's what I'm curious about is within this is that health is like healthy foods, meaning how do we get them to, or not that we're getting them to eat healthy foods, but how as parents should we help them to develop a relationship with food where they're making healthy food choices, not in the sense of, that choosing when to eat and what to eat, but more like also within like, there are certain foods that are healthier to eat versus not healthier. Like, for example, candy and ice cream and chocolate. So like within the model, it sounds like you're saying is that it's okay. We have the candy and let them when's a good time to stop eating candy, when it's too much candy. How can parents really, get their children to a place where on their own, they're really doing that?
Right. So in my house, I try not to label foods as bad or good, healthy or unhealthy, because I don't need my kids to know this is healthy or this is not healthy, because when I am in charge of the what, and I feed them all different types of foods, including, let's say, like I said, salmon, broccoli, and sweet potatoes and candy, then I might make them a plate, and they will decide to eat only the protein or only the carb and then have the candy. But when there's any like moral value around food, which is what we tend to do with ourselves and with our kids, then that's when kids start like binging on certain foods or hiding certain foods or making certain foods a really big deal. And I know what I'm going to say is controversial and really, really hard to implement, but it takes time. And like, I've seen an amazing result after like 2, 3, 4 weeks. So first of all, if you're the type of parent that restricts candy all the time, and then you put out on the table, let's say like a Shabbos party, like there's candy and there's chips and there's cake or whatever, and you're like, okay, everybody could take what they want, and then you see your child like throwing up, but you don't say anything, you're like freaking out inside. But usually what happens when you do give them at the time where you are offering what we call like play food or snack food, people don't like to eat like that. Most people don't like to eat like that, especially kids. So you might notice this with like your younger kids. Like, you might give a baby, let's say like a cookie and a plate of fruit, right? And you might notice that the child has half the cookie and half the strawberries. Adults don't do that, right? Because we're so like, oh my God, I started it, I better finish it. We have all this like moral value around good food and bad food. Kids don't really have that until we give it to them. So, does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm trying to like wrap my head around it a little bit. Like, meaning you're saying if we're giving them a value of, wow, candy is something really special. So then if candy becomes the Shabbos treat in a way, then we're giving it a certain value that on their own, they're not going to have. And therefore, in a way, we're putting candy up on a pedestal. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. And not only that, we tell our kids, you could only have dessert after you eat these yucky vegetables, right? That's kind of what we're saying. Eat your vegetables and then you could have dessert. So they're like, vegetables are gross and candy's amazing.
So you're saying like, if you have it all and they can choose to eat it whatever they want to eat it. So it's like they're equal. We're equalizing it when we put it on the plate and say, you can eat whatever you want to eat whenever you eat it within this meal.
Right. So the real true division of responsibility, they serve dessert with the meal. I don't do
Right.
that, and I don't recommend that, especially like I said before, from families. It doesn't really work because there's so many different ages, and that's where the responsive feeding comes in. That it's like very, very family dependent. Like if there was one kid there, I would be totally comfortable with that. And if especially if the parents are modeling the same thing, like what do you eat when it's a mealtime, right? You eat I mean, we try as adults, like all adults are trying to do this. We eat like our protein and our carbs and our fats and our fruits and vegetables, and then we'll have some candy or we'll have some cake or whatever, but we're not our whole meal. It's not very satisfying to have a meal of cake. And kids know that too. But they don't know that with 100% certainty. That's why we're in charge of the what, where, and when. That's why some people get very confused where they're like, so you're just telling me to give my kid candy all day? No, because you're in charge of what you give them, when you give it to them, and where you give it to them. So then if you don't want them to have candy, don't offer them candy. But I think that number one, we do shame people for liking candy, even though we give our kids so much candy. That's such a confusing message, right? We tell our kids like, it's such junk, it's so bad for you, it's going to make you fat, it's so bad for your teeth, and we give it to them. So what message are we giving our kids? It's really, really confusing to the kids.
Yeah.
We glorify it, right? We say like, you can't have that, you finish your plate, you're going to get it as a treat if you do blah, 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 even though we tell them that it's bad. So it's just like this very, very confusing message. And that's a lot of times when you see those kids like binging at a kiddish, you know that it's the kids that parents don't let them have any candy. And those are the kids that come to me when they're in their 20s and they're like, I don't know why I can't stop eating candy. Like I just eat it all day, so it creates a very negative relationship with food also.
Interesting. But you were saying like having it as part of a dinner, but wait, so I'm actually a little confused. You're saying you wouldn't recommend having it being a part because of the different ages, being a part of the meal in a normal way, in like on the plate.
Yeah. Right. So let's say like I have an 11-year-old and she is very intuitive. And this is like, I started incorporating this when she was like 2 or 3, when I started to learn about it. And she will say like, I'm really in the mood of like a real dinner. And she will make herself a turkey salad. And she'll also want a dessert after that. But if my baby sees that, then he's not going to have the turkey salad, right? Because he's not old enough to make that decision. So my baby's at 1.5, but in families that
But
have very
isn't that
small.
going against what you were saying in terms of like not having it become like, oh, if you have the food that I'm putting on, then you can have the dessert, which makes it like on the pedestal, no?
I think that because like I'm giving, like my kids are such different ages and stages, and I'm providing it, like I'm in charge of the what, where, and when, it gets confusing to the other kids at the table why I'm letting that
Mm-hmm.
child have a safe food versus not a safe food, because this child this and this child that. And that's why it's like responsive feeding. So let's say like my 1.5-year-old can't go to the fridge and take a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right? Because
Right.
he's 1.5, but my 5-year-old
Yeah.
can. So I have to treat all the kids differently. So it's like that wouldn't work for my family dynamic if I had one
No,
kid.
so I understand, but I'm saying, so therefore, what do you do? Meaning in terms of like, how do you not put the candy or the dessert or whatever it is on the pedestal, but still, offer it within this concept of, division of responsibility where it's all there for them to choose from. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, it does make sense what you're saying. I think it makes sense. I think I understand your question. You're saying like, if I think that they should be able to choose whatever they want at a mealtime, then why don't I just serve the dessert
No, so
with
I
the meal?
understand you're saying that we don't do it because of the fact that you're different age kids. So therefore, what should we do is I guess what I'm saying. Like practically speaking, what do we actually do?
So honestly, every family is different. That's why I like the coaching parents more than just
Responsive.
giving them.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I
Right.
don't just give them, oh, this is the guidelines. I have to hear like really what's going on in their family. And maybe one kid has ADHD and they really can't sit at the meal, and one kid gets home later because they're playing hockey or whatever. Like I have to know all those details in order to help. But let's say like for in my house, let's say like most of us, I serve dinner at like 5 because that's when I'm hungry and my kids are hungry. And I tell my kids, like, take whatever, like I serve, let's say, I try to do this. I don't always do this, but I think that it's best if I serve my kids like protein, carbs, fats. There's fats and proteins, and fruit or vegetable, right? So I will offer them whatever I make. Let's say last night, like I said before, we had hamburgers and sauteed veggies and pita. My kids don't really like sauteed veggies, so I'm not going to like force them to eat it. One of my kids actually did eat it, and she's like, wow, I really like it. But that's what I offered. And I'm trying to think, I think everybody ate it. Um, but one of my kids, I know when he comes home from school, he's not hungry for dinner. So I'm not going to make him sit with all of us. And that wouldn't work for a lot of moms, right? They all need to be served at the same time. And that's okay if you do that, if that's what works for you. I am able to accommodate this child. So I feed him at like 6, because that's when I know he's going to eat. He's going to eat until he's full. But I do tell my kids, once you get up from the table, I'm throwing out your plate. I know that sounds really mean, but why am I doing that for my children? Because I want them to know this is mealtime, and I don't want them to be grazing the whole night and not really filling up on the foods that feel good in their body and that do have nutritional value. And I'm trying to create a habit for my children and for my home, that we all kind of eat together. We all eat mostly the same foods, and we all eat until our bellies are comfortably full, and then we throw out our plate. And if they
So
tell
what
me,
about that kid who you threw out their plate, they're still hungry, and let's say they say before bed, can I have a yogurt? Is that
right,
no, I'm not giving you the yogurt? And no, I'll give you the yogurt. That's totally fine.
everybody has to do this is very individualized, but I will tell parents that it works great if you tell your kids after dinner we're not eating anything, so if you're still hungry, eat now. It depends what time they go to sleep. If you're feeding your kid at 5 and they're going to sleep at 8, they really might be hungry. But if they're going to sleep in a half hour, they should be able to fill up their belly until they're full. So you could say, are you sure you're done? Do you want a yogurt? And if they say no, when you put them to bed and they say they're hungry, you say, okay, the next meal is breakfast. I know that sounds so mean, but they'll learn that this is a mealtime and I
That's how
shouldn't
you
get up
teach
when I'm
them.
still
Right.
eating. Right. And they won't die. Like they'll be they'll be a little, it's okay if they're a little bit hungry. Like I wouldn't put your kid to bed if they're doing this every single night. We might have to change something around. Like I tell my kids, like my 5-year-old, like after dinner, if you're still hungry, you could take a fruit or a vegetable, and he'll take like 4 cucumbers, and I don't care. That's why I buy like a million cucumbers. I don't mind if he eats 4 cucumbers, go for it. If you want an apple, if you want an orange, but dinner is over. Like I can't be serving dinner for 4 hours at night, and I don't think it's good for
Sure.
him either to know that he could graze. It's not good for him to graze, because that's what part of intuitive eating is, that most people feel hungry every 2 to 3 hours, and we get the most pleasure from our eating when we're moderately hungry, and when we stop when we're moderately full. And that's why so many clients come to me, because they can't stop grazing. They're just eating all day, right? Because first of all, maybe they're not eating because they're hungry. They're eating because they're bored. They're eating because they're sad. So they're not going to stop eating when they're full, because they didn't start when they were hungry, right? They aren't making themselves meals. A lot of times that happens because they didn't grow up in a house with a meal, like whatever you find in the cabinet, which is, again, no judgment. I understand why it's so hard to put food on the table. I never judge my clients. I love food, and I love to cook, and I love creating recipes. So for me, that's easier. For a mom that hates cooking, maybe 2 nights a week or 3 nights a week, she should give them chicken nuggets, because that's going to make her less stressed, and she's going to create a less stress atmosphere. And honestly, that's the healthiest thing you could give to your kids.
Wow, this is fascinating. It's very interesting. It's very, very interesting. I think there's a lot of power to what you're saying. Like if you raise your children in this way, where it's really you're putting out the options, and then it's up to them to choose what to eat. It's going to raise children who are responsible for their own feeding and create that healthy relationship. It's very, very powerful. Wow, this is great.
Yeah. It's definitely I think I get like a lot of the same reaction that you're having now, because it is confusing, and there's like a lot of like these guidelines, and with like responsive feeding, every family is different, and kids are so different, and parents are so different, and their schedules are so different. That's why I like that it allows for that. Like Believe Me Heller and we did a podcast together on this, and she was like,
yeah,
so
that's
happy.
how I listened to your Believe Me Heller podcast, and that was how I first learned about you.
Yeah, and she was like, I told her that like I also was very like a purist to division of responsibility, and then I kind of made my way over to like this responsive feeding, and like I kind of use my intuitive eating knowledge a lot with parents also. And she was like, yeah, I had that same like intuition that you can't enforce it, like, oh, but you can't eat that because like I didn't serve it. Like if my kids ask me, could I have a snack now? And I look at the time and it's been in 2 hours, I'll be like, sure. Though I didn't quote unquote offer it, I still know that there has to be flexibility in the framework of it, right? Because otherwise it's too rigid.
I'm curious, I guess my final question, and then I'll ask you if you have any like final advice. But my question is in terms of like within Judaism, how does this fit into like having a special food for a Yom Tov, having a special food for a Shabbos, where it's like we are in a way, we do have special foods that we save for those times, and we put certain foods up on a pedestal for those times. There is a concept of like a Shabbos treat, or would you say
Mhm.
no? That goes against this. We shouldn't really have Shabbos treats. We shouldn't be having because it in a way puts it up on a certain pedestal. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so because I'm from, obviously my answer is going to be colored by like my Judaism, which is why I love the division of responsibility slash responsive feeding, because this is what I came to after like a few years of practicing this myself. Um, Shabbos, it says in the Torah that we're supposed to eat special foods on Shabbos and Yom right? So I'm totally okay with having Shabbos cereal and weekday cereal because I want my kids to know Shabbos is different than weekday, and I could use food to help them know that. We do serve more candy and more desserts on Shabbos, and that's great. Eat more candy and eat more desserts on Shabbos and be excited for it. I think that when kids get like really obsessive about the candy is when the intention is very different. Like their parents really don't want them to take candy, but they put it out anyways, right? Or like they put out the candy, but then they limit it. So I'm like, again, I'm thinking about my kids as adults, right? I'm perfectly happy if my child has dessert with their meal every single night, and then on Shabbos they eat like a more special dessert, right? Because that elevates their Shabbos. Or like we are gonna have like
So
meat and
would you
wine.
like? Can I get personal for a second? Like, do you
Yeah.
actually give your children a dessert every night with their
No, so
meal?
I don't give my kids dessert every night with their meal. Like I said before, I don't.
But because of the age. But I'm saying, in theory, you would do that.
It's a good question. I've thought about this, like why I don't do it. They eat so much dessert throughout the day. I don't think that they need dessert after dinner. Personally,
Mm-hmm.
they eat so many snack bags and so much candy throughout the day that's when I'm more like feeding them their fruits and their vegetables. Like I'm totally fine with. I used to not be okay with this. I used to be like, you have to take an apple and you have to take your applesauce, but why? They're just throwing it in the garbage. So let them have their fruits and vegetables at night, and that way I do have a little bit more control at night, and I'm totally fine with that.
Interesting.
So like I'm saying, like I could judge myself and be like, why am I not giving them dessert every night? I'm in charge of the what. I don't think they need to have dessert at three meals, and maybe sometimes if it's somebody's birthday, I will elevate the food. And that's, you could use food to elevate things, but it shouldn't be like that we're obsessive about it, right? But like on Shabbos or Yom I will make more special food, and but sometimes that special food might be like, um, edamame, I mean, I make edamame all the time, but I'm just saying it doesn't have to be
Yeah.
like cake food. It could be like a food
Mm-hmm.
that's like very, sorbet or something that's like hard to make. Meaning, like, it doesn't have to be like, quote unquote, the healthy food is during the week and the unhealthy food is for Shabbos. But we could still have an elevated food for Shabbos
So
and
you're saying
use
like the
that.
Shabbos treat is okay, but just make it like whatever they're doing, let's say maybe in a way during the week, elevate it a little bit more. And that's the Shabbos component, or that's the Yom Tov component. But not that it should be like, you can never have this ever
Right.
except for on Shabbos.
I think that's right. Exactly. Like, because otherwise they're not going to feel, I don't think kids feel comfortable when they're like, I need the food and everybody's eating it. I think they feel very uncomfortable. That's how I feel, because I know I feel uncomfortable when I'm like, oh no, I'm not going to get enough because blah, blah, blah. All my 8 siblings, like it's not a comfortable feeling to feel like, I guess it's like an insecurity. But like I know my kids talk about this all the time where they're like, oh yeah, my friend, she's only allowed to have XYZ. And I don't like, I won't say to my kid like, oh, you could only have X amount of pizza. Like you could have until you're full, or until there's none left, right? There is like a reality that there's not endless food. That's okay too. I know people get confused about that also.
But with candy, like a child, if you're what I'm understanding is we shouldn't be limiting our child's candy consumption. Let's say Shabbos, someone brings over a candy platter, and we shouldn't say, oh, you can only have 3 pieces. But how can we expect a child on their own to be able to like
Regulate.
learn and say, I should really only have, let's say, max 10 pieces here, and then I should call it, quits for today.
Well, why do you think they should stop at 10? Like, let's just say, like you said, hypothetical 10. But why?
No,
why
not necessarily 10. I'm giving any random, whatever, any number. Meaning, how do we get them to a point where they can understand, okay, there is a point where I should stop with this, and that I shouldn't just have, an insane amount, and then I'm going to be puking, whatever it is. Like, how do we get them to that point where they can realize on their own?
So how do you know to stop as an adult? I'm asking you.
It's a good question. I mean, for me, I happen to love candy. I really do. I love candy and I love chocolate. And, for me, I'll have like a little bit here and there as a treat, just as like, sometimes I'll have, maybe this is unhealthy and I shouldn't be saying this, but or unhealthy, whatever. Sometimes for me, it's like, I'll have candy just to help me stay awake at night. Cause like I keep crazy hours and I'm going to try to like have a little bit of extra sugar cause I don't drink coffee. So it's like, okay, that's like how I get myself to like stay awake. Maybe that's one way. And like, then I'll sometimes have like a little more, just like give me the sugar I need. Other times it's like, I like candy. This looks really good. I'll have a couple of pieces and then like, I'm good to go.
Right, but
I don't know. It's a good question. I'm not sure. I've never thought of it before. Like, how do I know when to stop?
Right.
Yeah, that's good. It's good. Right. I like the challenge.
Right. So most people, including kids, don't feel good when they're a meal. Like most of their calories from a meal. Right. Why do we get full? Right. Because there's a hormonal interplay going on when we get hungry and when we get full. So when we feel hungry, our body secretes ghrelin. When we feel full, our body secretes leptin. Right. There's a certain amount of like, that's why let's say we average people should have around 2,000 calories a day, right? And like, let's say after we eat, let's say a meal is 400 calories, our bellies feel full. That's just the way it works, right? Our hormones are regulating and signaling to our brain, oh, I've had enough food, my stomach is full, and we will stop eating. Otherwise, we would just be eating and eating and eating all day, right? So kids have that too, and most people don't feel good when we eat 400 calories worth of sugar. Kids don't feel good either. But if there's something called like rebellious eating, if their parents don't ever let them have candy and all their friends are eating candy and it does taste really good, and the only time they're allowed to have it is on Shabbos, even though they might not be making this cheshbon in their head so consciously, they'll be like, I'm just going to eat the candy. And they'll just keep eating and eating and eating. But if you give your children, let's say, whatever you consider as a wholesome meal, and that you don't offer them whatever they want as an aside, like, it's just funny to see. I obviously, like, I'm not saying because I'm doing such a great job. It's just funny. Like in my house on Shabbos, we always have like cholent, and sometimes we have schnitzel, sometimes we don't, and a big salad. And that's what my kids like. They like cholent and they like salad because that's what I feed them every single week. And then we serve like dessert or candy or whatever. And sometimes they do eat like a lot of candy, and I'll let them they tell me they have a bellyache later. I'll be like, yeah, sometimes when we eat a lot of anything, if we eat 100 carrots, our stomach would hurt, right? I'm giving them some information and some knowledge. But they will learn how to regulate if we allow them to. Just like we learn how to regulate, some adults don't because they've been so restricted. But we do, just like you eventually stop eating because you're like, okay, I'm good, I'm done. Children will be able to learn the same. But parents are very scared of this. If you've been a restrictive parent and you really are trying to implement this, for the first 2, 3, 4 weeks, your kids might be binging on candy. But eventually they're like, oh, my mom really does let me have candy. It's very scary to implement. And I totally will validate
that's very interesting. Very interesting. Wow. Okay. As we wrap up, any, we have the model. I feel like we got a good understanding now. Any final piece of advice, final message to parents?
Yeah. So just because like my passion is intuitive eating, I hope and pray that like either the content that I put out or other people are putting out, whether it's like the Evelyn Tripoli and Elise Resch, the people who wrote intuitive eating, or just the people out there who are spreading the knowledge. I think it's really, really important for parents and moms, especially I'm a mom, to like, don't look in the mirror and like say like, oh, I'm so fat, or I feel so ugly about myself, even if you are feeling bad about yourself. And don't make food such a big deal. Because the more you do that, you're going to have the opposite effect on your kid, that your kid's going to look in the mirror and think that they look ugly, or they're going to think that fat is the worst thing ever, or they're going to think that, if they eat a piece of candy, then they're bad. So just be really careful with the words that you use, even though I know it's so annoying not to say healthy or unhealthy because we're used to categorizing food. And I know that like I'm annoying when I'm like, don't use that word, which is fine. You could use whatever words you want, but just to be careful with like the language that you use around your body and food with kids, because it makes I'm the one that sees those kids as adults when it makes such a big impression on them. So even if you are struggling with body image and you are ready to like make a change, like the first thing to do is to really work on your own body image and your own relationship with food. And that will have like a huge impact on your children's body image and their relationship with food.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This was very insightful. This is really, I found this to be interesting, engaging. Is great. Really. Thank you so much for your time and for your really giving us your expertise on this. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on. It was really, really great. I really enjoyed.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of The Jews Next Door. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. I'd love to hear your takeaways. Reach out to us. Reach out to me at yair@genoff.org, hi@genoff.org. You can check us out on the website. You could leave a question there. We'd love to be in touch. Please be in touch. Check us out on Instagram at Parenting the Jews Next Door. Hit me up on Twitter at Yair Menshel. And we're on TikTok now too. We have some great content, a lot of really great insights into parenting, tips, parenting pointers, reaction videos, and quotes. We have a lot going on. We have a lot of articles. You want to check it out. Check it out at genoff.org. You won't be sorry you did. And I look forward to hearing from you. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the podcast, make sure you subscribe and share it with your family and friends. Looking forward to another great episode next week.